Report on a National Bank, Part 2. If the abuses of a beneficial thing are to determine its condemnation, there is scarcely a source of public prosperity which will not speedily be closed. In every case, the evil is to be compared with the good, and in the present case such a comparison will issue in this, that the new and increased energies derived to commercial enterprise from the aid of banks are a source of general profit and advantage, which greatly outweigh the partial ills of the overtrading of a few individuals, at particular times, or of numbers of particular conjunctures. The fourth and fifth charges may be considered together. These relate to the aid which is sometimes afforded by banks to unskilled adventurers and fraudulent traders. These charges also have some degree of foundation, though far less than has been pretended, and they add to the instances of partial ills connected with more extensive and overbalancing benefits. The practice of giving fictitious credit to improper persons is one of those evils which experience, guided by interest, speedily corrects. The bank itself is in so much jeopardy of being a sufferer by it that it has the strongest of all inducements to be on its guard. It may not only be injured immediately by the delinquencies of the persons to whom such credit is given, but eventually by the incapacities of others whom their impositions or failures may have ruined. Nor is there much danger of a bank being betrayed into this error from want of disinformation. The directors themselves, being for the most part selected from the class of traders, are to be expected to possess individually an accurate knowledge of the characters and situations of those who come within that description, and they have, in addition to this, the course of dealing of the persons themselves with the bank to assist their judgment, which is in most cases a good index of the state in which those persons are. The artifices and shifts which those in desperate or declining circumstances are obliged to employ to keep up the countenance which the rules of the bank require, and the train of their connections, are so many prognostics not difficult to be interpreted of the fate which awaits them. Hence, if it not unfrequently happens that banks are the first to discover the unsoundness of such characters, and by withholding credit to announce to the public that they are not entitled to it. And if banks, in spite of every precaution, are sometimes betrayed into giving a false credit to the persons described, they more frequently enable honest and industrious men of small or perhaps of no capital to undertake and prosecute business with advantage to themselves and to the community, and assist merchants of both capital and credit who meet with fortuitous and unforeseen shocks, which might, without such helps, prove fatal to them and to others, to make head against their misfortunes, and finally to retrieve their affairs. Circumstances which form no inconsiderable ecumen of the utility of banks. But the last and heaviest charge is still to be examined. That is, that banks tend to banish the gold and silver of the country. The force of this objection rests upon there being an engine of paper credit which, by furnishing a substitute for the metals, is supposed to promote their expropriation. It is an object which, if it has any foundation, lies not against banks peculiarly, but against every species of paper credit. The most common answer given to it is that the thing supposed is of little or no consequence, that it is immaterial what serves the purpose of money, whether paper or gold and silver, that the effect of both upon industry is the same, and that the intrinsic wealth of the nation is to be measured not by the abundance of the precious metals contained in it, but by the quantity of productions of its labor and industry. The answer is not destitute of solidity, though not entirely satisfactory. It is certain that the vivification of industry by a full circulation, with the aid of a proper and well-regulated paper credit, may more than compensate for the loss of a part of the gold and silver of a nation, if the consequence of avoiding that loss should be scanty or defective circulation. But the positive and permanent increase or decrease of the precious metals in a country can hardly ever be a matter of indifference. As the commodity taken in lieu of every other, it is a species of the most effective wealth, and as the money of the world, it is of great concern to the state that it possesses a sufficiency of it to face any demands which the protection of its external interests may create. The objection seems to admit of another and a more conclusive answer, which controverts the fact itself. A nation that has no mines of its own must derive the precious metals from others, generally speaking, in exchange for the products of its labor and industry. The quantity it will possess will therefore, in the ordinary course of things, be regulated by the favorable or unfavorable balance of its trade. That is, by the proportion between its abilities to supply foreigners and its wants of them, between the amount of its exportations and that of its importations. Hence, the state of its agriculture and manufactures, the quantity and quality of its labor and industry must, in the main, influence and determine the increase or decrease of its gold and silver. If this be true, the inference seems to be that well-constituted banks favor the increase of the precious metals. It has been shown that they augment in different ways the active capital of the country. This it is which generates employment, which animates and expands labor and industry. Every addition which is made to it, by contributing to put in motion a greater quantity of both, tends to create a greater quantity of the products of both, and by furnishing more materials for exportation, conduces a favorable balance of trade, and consequently to the induction and increase of gold and silver. This conclusion appears to be drawn from solid premises. There are, however, objections to be made to it. It may be said that as bank paper affords a substitute for specie, it serves to counteract that rigorous necessity for the metals as a medium of circulation, which in the case of a wrong balance might restrain, in some degree, their expropriation. And it may be added that from the same cause, in the same case, it would retard those economical and parsimonious reforms in the manner of living which the scarcity of money is calculated to produce, and which might be necessary to rectify such wrong balance. There is perhaps some truth in both these observations, but they appear to be of a nature rather to form exceptions to the generality of the conclusion than to overthrow it. The state of things in which the absolute exigencies of circulation can be supposed to resist with any efficient effect the urgent demand for specie, which a wrong balance of trade may occasion, presents an extreme case, and a situation in which too expensive manner of living of a community, compared with its means, can stand in need of a corrective from distress or necessity, is one which perhaps rarely results but from extraordinary and advantageous causes, such, for example, as a national revolution, which unsettles all the established habits of a people, and inflames the appetite for extravagance, by the illusions of an ideal wealth, engendered by the continual multiplication of a depreciating currency of some similar cause. There is good reason to believe that where the laws are wise and well executed, and the inviolability of property and contracts maintained, the economy of a people will, in the general course of things, correspond with its means. The support of industry is probably in every case of more consequence towards correcting a wrong imbalance of trade than any practicable retrenchments in the expenses of families or individuals, and the stagnation of it would be likely to have more effect in prolonging than any such savings in shortening its countenance. That stagnation is a natural consequence of an inadequate medium, which, without the aid of bank circulation, would, in the cases supposed, be severely felt. It also deserves notice that as the circulation is always in a compound ratio to the fund upon which it depends, and to the demand for it, and as that fund is itself affected by the exportation of the metals, there is no danger of it being overstocked, as in the case of paper issued at the pleasure of the government, or of its preventing the consequences of any unfavorable balance from being sufficiently felt to produce the reforms alluded to, as far as circumstances may require and admit. Nothing can be more fallible than the comparisons which have been made between different countries to illustrate the truth of the position under consideration. The comparative quantity of gold and silver in different countries depends upon an infinite variety of facts and combinations, all of which ought to be known in order to judge whether the existence of or non-existence of paper currencies has any share in the relative proportions they contain. The mass and value of the productions of the labor and industry of each, compared with its wants, the nature of its establishments abroad, the kinds of wars in which it is usually engaged, the relations it bears to the countries which are the original possessors of those metals, the privileges it enjoys in their trade, these and a number of other circumstances are all to be taken into the account, and render the investigation too complex to justify any reliance on the vague and general surmises which have been hitherto hazarded on the point. In the foregoing discussion, the objection has been considered as applying to the permanent expulsion and diminution of the metals. Their temporary exportation for particular purposes has not been contemplated. This, it must be confessed, is facilitated by banks, from the facility they possess of supplying their place, but their utility is in nothing more conspicuous than in these very cases. They enable the government to pay its foreign debts, and to answer any exigencies which the external concerns of the community may have produced. They enable the merchant to support his credit, on which the prosperity of trade depends. When special circumstances prevent remittances in other modes, they enable him also to prosecute enterprises which ultimately tend to an augmentation of the species of wealth in question. It is evident that gold and silver may often be employed in procuring commodities abroad, which in circuitous commerce replace the original fund, with considerable addition. But it is not to be inferred from this facility given to temporary exportation that banks which are so friendly to trade and industry are in their general tendency inimical to the increase of the precious metals.